Om Asto Ma Sadgamaya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurmam Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om Peace Peace Peace. Namaskaram friends. Welcome back on the topic of Drg Drsya Viveka. And before we start today's section, today's part, let us go back to section 1, where some persons have raised one query, that is the importance of the Drg Drsya Viveka, although they have understood seer seen concept, but how does it help them in their spiritual progress? So I thought I will answer that before I go to this today's topic. Friends, as you have seen, there were three layers of seer seen relationship. The third layer was consciousness as the seer and mind as an object, mind as seen. Now, what do we want? We want self realization. Now, through self realization, we want God realization. What is self? As I told you in Who Am I video, I am pure consciousness. I am pure Atman. Alright, which is Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahman. That consciousness, when it becomes seer, it we our mind becomes attached to consciousness, and we remain in Drishta Bhav or Sakshi Bhav or witness or observer. We become observer, and that is the stage where we must remain, whether in meditation or otherwise, or in waking stage. First, let us practice that to remain in that stage during meditation. Then, after doing some days of practice, you will automatically experience that stage while in the waking stage also during the whole day. So that was the main purpose of the first part, wherein the seer and seen concept was very important to realize the self. That only consciousness, that pure consciousness is the self, with whom, with which our mind must get attached permanently, and that is how we will go to God realization. So, friends, today's topic is reflected consciousness. Today's all the verses will talk about the reflected consciousness. Now, before we start this seriously, we should understand what is reflected consciousness. You know, reflected consciousness, I'll give you one or two examples before we proceed further. One is the sun, when it reflects in the ponds of water, the same sun appears, but it is not the same sun, but it is a reflection of the sun. When sun reflects in the mirror, it gives it gives the same light and enlightens the dark room. The dark room also becomes enlightened, but that is only reflection of the sun. Similarly, friends, when we talk about even the moon doesn't have the light of its own, it borrows it from the sun. So that again is the reflection of the sun's light on to the moon, which comes here. Similarly, our consciousness, our consciousness, which pervades everywhere, it pervades everywhere, and it enlightens the intellect. The intellect gets enlightened by this very consciousness, and that intellect, when it gets the consciousness, it gets reflection of that consciousness, which is called reflected consciousness. This concept is very important before we proceed further. What is reflected consciousness? Then only the other parts will uh, be understood. Now, when the intellect becomes uh, enlightened or enlivened by the consciousness, it passes on the same consciousness to other sense organs and in turn to the body. So this is what is written here. So it consciousness pervades everything but is reflected clearly only in the subtle body. Subtle body means suksham sharira, but especially in the intellect. The ego arises as the owner aspect of thought, the rest of the thought, its content and emotions. So we'll go to next slide now. The identity of the reflected consciousness and ego is like that between fire and the heated iron ball. Now let us understand this. You see, the fire which doesn't have any form, it is full of heat, but formless. And when the iron cold ball comes into contact with fire, then what happens? The fire transfers its properties to the cold iron ball. In turn, what happens? The cold iron ball becomes heated up and starts emitting even light and heat. This means it is getting transferred, the heat is getting transferred from fire to the iron ball. Similarly, the consciousness also gets transferred to the first intellect. Intellect becomes the same consciousness with its reflected consciousness. Then it passes on to the first mind, and then to sense organs, and then finally to the gross body. With this, after once the gross body becomes conscious with that reflected consciousness, it is it becomes we say that it has life in it. So this is the main uh, crux of this verse. So sentiency filters down from consciousness to reflected consciousness to ego. Ego gives to mind, mind gives to senses, and senses gives to body. So we'll come to next verse now. Now the identification of the ego. Ego here means what we are trying to say is this is ahankar, the doership, and ego consciousness is jiva. Ego consciousness is jiva. So the jiva is bound through these three false identifications. Now what are those identifications? False identifications. One, reflected consciousness. With reflected consciousness, the cause is natural, means it naturally the ego or amkar or jiva is becomes fused, or it becomes union with reflected consciousness, and there is no cause, it is natural cause. But with the gross body, it is born of past actions. With gross body, it is not natural, it is born of karma, our past karmas. And the third is consciousness or the witness is born due to delusion. So the identification of the ego, that is ahankar, with consciousness or the witness is is born due to ignorance. Now friends, now these identifications must be eliminated, although the first one cannot be eliminated, cannot be removed. The reflected consciousness with the cause where it is natural, that cannot be eliminated, but the with the gross body it can be eliminated by exhausting the karmas, by exhausting all the karmas, past karmas, or even the present karmas. By doing only selfless actions, it can be removed, it can be eliminated. And third, the, uh, identification of the ego with the consciousness can be also eliminated by direct knowledge. So this is very important. So uh, reflected consciousness is also called chidabhasa. Now chidabhasa can be uh, the connection with chidabhasa continues as long as individuality exists. Through karam yoga and self knowledge, the other two identifications can be dissolved. This is very important because if we want liberation, then these all these identifications must be removed. So the strategy for liberation, what is strategy for liberation is, that is the attain self knowledge, and it has gone ahead. So okay, so we were here, next verse we were here. So the natural reflection identification drops away spontaneously if we uh, remove the delusion through karma. So we'll come to next verse. Now you see, when the ego is in absorption in deep sleep, you see the ego is the pivot of all experience. It must be tackled in the waking state where it is fully available. Now that means the consciousness, reflected consciousness, is fully manifested in the waking stage. In the waking stage, in deep sleep, it vanishes temporarily, showing it is not permanent. But in the in dream stage, it is in semi-conscious state. That is, your mind is working, but it reflects only those impressions or those vasanas of the karmas during the daytime, during the waking time, which you experience, which comes as a dream. So this is what is the meaning of this. Now we'll come to next verse now. Now thoughts are illuminated by reflected consciousness, enabling perception and imagination. In dream, the mind projects stored vasanas, that is what I told you, latent impressions. In waking, it perceives objects outside. So obviously dreams, whatever we see in the dreams, that is the same impressions or vasanas what we experience during waking stage. In deep sleep there is no mental activity. In deep sleep there is no mental activity, hence no projection. The antakarna the antakarna acts only when empowered by the ego, which in turn borrows light from consciousness. So friends, now having understood this, so now what is the subtle body or suksham sharira is the vehicle of transmigration. As we have already known, suksham sharira only goes from one body to another. The birth and death corresponds to the embodiment and disembodiment of the real self, that is Atman. But the real self, Atman, remains untouched by these changes. Liberation, moksha, occurs when all identification of the jiva dissolves and only pure consciousness remains realized as one's true self, true nature. So what we'll do is, we will understand the essence of this section 2, and these are the few points which I have written. Consciousness alone is real and self luminous. When it reflects in the intellect, the inert mind and ego appear alive. This illusion, this illusion creates the jiva, the individual experiencer of the world. Through ignorance, the jiva identifies with the body and suffers birth and death. Through self knowledge, this ignorance is dispelled and the ego dissolves. And the one infinite consciousness shines as Aham Brahmasmi or I am Brahman. So, friends, this is the crux of this part 2, reflected consciousness. I'm sure you have understood this, and uh, you know, since we are all moving towards liberation, and so uh, this is how we have to realize. So, this is the end. Thank you very much. Namaskaram.